It is of the utmost importance that we, as teachers, create a safe and positive learning environment for all students. In our efforts to create such an environment, it becomes essential that we understand those students and all the different kinds of people that make up the student body that we will be educating. We must also understand these classifications and the overlap or intersectionality between these types of students. This presentation will go over just one population of students, those that fall within the LGBTQIA+ classifications. Our mission as educators, as described before, is to accommodate all kinds of students with a suitable learning environment and understand how those accommodations are necessary for each student's intersections of identity. Intersectionality is defined by Merriam-Webster's dictionary as the complex and cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination combine, overlap, or intersect. Our students will come to us with differing levels of societal discrimination, such as racism, sexism, or classism, and it is our job to ensure that their education is unimpeded by such discriminations. To begin to understand LGBT+ students, it's important to understand what the very inclusive acronym stands for. LGBTQIA+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, intersex, and asexual, with the plus sign being indicative of inclusion for other identities as well. These groups are vast in their identities, so it would sound like it would be a difficult task to identify strategies to make all of them feel included. However, these groups have faced similar hardships and can likewise be given equitable treatment in much the same way, but don't go assuming that they all will. First things first, right off the bat, if you as an educator see a student struggling with bullying, grades, other social pressures, or they confide within you about such topics, your priority is 100% with the safety of these students. Recommending helpful resources such as counseling or suicide prevention when warning signs and behaviors are spotted is extremely important for students that fall within these populations. If you for some reason cannot take anything away from this presentation other than one thing, let it be saving the lives of these vulnerable students. Sometimes students within the LGBT+ community cannot openly communicate their need for help to friends or family members. When students see you as a helpful resource, your educational environment improves with the trust between you. Talk Saves Lives, by the way, is an educational program for educators that features data, research, prevention strategies, and guidance on how to best help and support LGBTQ people. So we've all heard about this Title IX thing, right? No discrimination based on sex in sports, right? Well, this is where a little more knowledge of US history comes in handy. Title IX was originally drafted in 1972 and has changed over the years. For the purposes of this presentation, I will highlight a confirmation from the US Department of Education from June 16, 2021, that Title IX protects students from discrimination not just based on sex, but also sexual orientation and gender identity, as a result of the Bostock v. Clayton County Supreme Court decision. Bostock v. Clayton County was a court case heard by the Supreme Court in which Gerald Bostock was fired from his position in Georgia's Clayton County offices as a direct result of his appearance, which Clayton County defined as unbecoming, in a local gay softball league. The decision was made by the Supreme Court that this firing was unlawful and that Bostock was protected by the same laws concerning Title IX he was protected by Title VII. As an educator, it's important to understand what the case means and to stand behind your LGBT students if they face discrimination. It is unlawful for the school or you to discriminate against them. Intersectionality with other special populations. Students who fall into the LGBT special populations naturally fall into other special populations as well. People are complex after all. This is called intersectionality. For an example, in Joshua M. Pice's Queering Practice Journal, he notes that when it comes to English language teaching, students are presumed heterosexual until proven otherwise. This is noteworthy particularly when it comes to teaching a language or language arts, because the perception of sexuality and gender relations is extremely important to interpreting a work. And in language, it's extremely important if your words have gendered pronouns. And assumptions can't just be made based on little to nothing. We all know the saying, "to assume makes an ass out of you and me," although I'm not certain correcting someone's being an ass. DEI. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's what you're working for achieving with LGBT plus students by watching this presentation. Students need to feel respected, welcome, and need to be given the same opportunities for success as students with different backgrounds, no matter what those backgrounds may be. In the next few slides, we'll go over all three of these letters that make up the acronym. I know there are a lot of acronyms here today, but please stay with me. Diversity. Promoting diversity within the classroom doesn't mean highlighting and singling out the differences between students at every opportunity. Students should simply just feel welcome to share their life experiences with peers and educators without fearing judgment. We'll bring this up a little later, but it's important that it's relevant. It's tied to respect for the classroom and perceived respect given back. As Christine Bombaro notes in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Action, awareness of DEI issues does not cleanly translate into actual behaviors that reduce inequality. Simply being aware that there is an issue does not solve the issue. So given that, what's the best way to promote diversity in the classroom? Maintaining a level of respect with the individual students. Equity. Equity is defined as something that possesses the quality of being fair. Promoting fairness around the classroom may sound difficult, as not everybody inherently has equal access to the same resources as anyone else in life's broader view, and this is true of LGBT plus students as well. In a section specifically about equity from Bombaro's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Action piece, she notes that it can be helpful to address the biases and context of learning material before the students dive in head first. As LGBT plus youths and other special population groups face so many discriminatory instances, sometimes even day to day, it's important to allow for students to be given the opportunity for success, even if it means they really can't read an article about a particularly traumatic event. This isn't even exclusive to LGBT plus youths. The classroom should be and should remain fair for all your students. Finally, the last letter in DEI, inclusion. Students need a sense of belonging, right? Nobody truly wants to feel excluded. In Pius's queering practice, he brings up a point I found relevant even outside language teaching classes, that inclusion isn't something to be forced per se. Students want to feel included in the classroom community before even a word is said in the classroom itself. They don't like assumptions being made of them, and don't want that. Think about it. Do you want them making any assumptions about you? Probably not. Including LGBT plus students can be as simple as acknowledging the student no different from others during class time, as long as you're mindful about individual boundaries, classroom rules, and what is socially acceptable and what is not. It's time to talk about the 3 R's in education and how they're key to reaching LGBT plus students. These R's being relationships, relevance, and rigor. These are all important in all classrooms, but for the sake of this presentation, I will be highlighting how they assist in specifically reaching those students that fall within the LGBT plus special populations. Firstly, relationships. This may seem like a recap, but that's because this is so important. Maintaining healthy relationships with your students as an educator is pivotal to your success in education. Think back to your own favorite teachers. Didn't they nurture a connection with you? And didn't that encourage you to work harder in class? It's not often that someone fails in a class where they love their teacher. When you respect the student respects you. You're an important part of this person's life. Being someone for an LGBT plus or other students that you can confide in may be what is required of you to properly educate all your students. Next up is relevance. Common issues amongst those faced by LGBT plus students are those that concern things like outdated texts and learning materials. Some schools don't have it in the budget for new books every year. And with our lives in the information age leading to new information being discovered every day, the accelerated pace of humanity today might just be too much for the budgets of our schools. Even within the last decade, many in the LGBT community have rejected the word queer being part of the extended acronym, opting instead to advocate for questioning being what the Q stands for. This is a topic of debate as some try to reclaim the word, as they say. But many still consider that word derogatory. Material such as this should be avoided, but if it must be taught, it is argued it should be done so without bias or assumptions about what is acceptable, instead acknowledging the context of the information and presenting it in a way that is acceptable. Finally, the last R, rigor. No, not like rigor mortis, the process organic matter goes through after death, but rigor in the sense of what it means in the classroom. Rigor is determination. It's the resources and help from others students receive that allows them to overcome challenges such as course material. An educator must express the desire to teach their students, and those students must work for their achievements regardless of how much is achieved or is expected of them. To account for LGBT+ special population students, whether you know where they're coming from or not, work must be done to meet and support them. If you need to alter what you teach or the specific way it is taught, do it for their sake. And when you notice they're working hard, praise that work. As some educators may find students that step outside what they consider the norm, and I use gigantic air quotes around that, it's just as important, if not more important, to praise LGBT+ students when they're trying. Well, that's all I got for now. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I hope it was informative to you. And to any LGBT+ special population students or other educators, I hope I wasn't weird about it. I know it's a sensitive topic, so I wanted to give it the respect it deserves while still being informative to the common teacher. Oh, and here's the sources I used. Goodbye.
Bye-bye!